There are people around you, smiling, speaking softly, pretending to care, while hiding something dark behind their eyes. Not every battle in your life is physical. Some attacks were sent. Some storms were invited. What if the person draining your peace is not just toxic, but spiritually dangerous? What if strange patterns, constant confusion, sudden fear, and unexplained oppression are not coincidences at all? Tonight, hidden signs will be exposed, and once you see them, you will never look at certain people the same way again. You noticed it before, but you ignored it. Something about them always felt heavy, not normal heavy, spiritual heavy. Every time they entered the room, the atmosphere changed. Peace disappeared, confusion increased. Arguments suddenly exploded out of nowhere. And the frightening part is this: they often hide behind charm, kindness, or false innocence. Because darkness rarely introduces itself openly. It studies, it watches, it blends in. One of the first signs that a person may be operating under dark spiritual influence is an unnatural attraction to darkness itself. They constantly talk about death, curses, destruction, revenge, fear, or spiritual power. Not casually, obsessively, their conversations always drift toward darkness. You leave interactions with them feeling drained instead of strengthened. You feel anxious after speaking to them, restless after being near them, mentally foggy after hearing their voice, and you cannot explain why. That is how spiritual oppression works. Not every attack arrives with screaming and chaos. Sometimes it arrives quietly through influence. There are people who carry spiritual contamination. You must understand this. A person deeply connected to dark spiritual practices often releases confusion wherever they go. Friendships collapse around them. Families break apart around them. Church division follows them. Peace disappears around them. And somehow they always act like the victim. That is not accidental. Dark influence feeds on disorder. Have you ever met someone who secretly enjoys seeing people fight? Someone who constantly spreads rumors, plants suspicion, manipulates emotions, and then stands back pretending innocence? Be careful, because some people do not merely enjoy drama, they are spiritually empowered by division. They know exactly how to trigger fear, insecurity, jealousy, and emotional instability. And many believers never recognize it because they are only looking with physical eyes. But spiritual warfare cannot be understood with natural thinking alone. You must discern. There are individuals who become deeply uncomfortable whenever the name of God is mentioned with authority. Watch carefully. When real prayer begins, they withdraw. When worship becomes intense, they become irritated. When truth confronts darkness, their attitude changes immediately. Why? Because darkness reacts to light. You may notice strange behavior patterns. They mock spiritual discipline. They belittle prayer. They discourage fasting. They attack conviction. They call holiness extreme. They subtly pull people away from spiritual growth. Not aggressively at first, strategically, little by little. That is how deception works. And many people fall into dangerous spiritual traps because the enemy rarely attacks through obvious evil. Sometimes the enemy attacks through emotionally manipulative people. People who know how to gain trust before releasing destruction. Must pay attention to the fruit surrounding a person's life. Not their words, not their appearance, not their public image. Fruit. What follows them consistently? Chaos, fear, confusion, manipulation, emotional exhaustion. Jesus warned that spiritual deception would increase. And one of the greatest mistakes believers make is assuming that every smiling face carries good intentions. Number, some people study weakness. They watch your pain. They learn your vulnerabilities. Then they slowly use emotional pressure, fear, guilt, or seduction to gain influence over your life. You suddenly stop praying the way you used to. You lose motivation. Your mind becomes cloudy. Your confidence disappears. Your spiritual fire weakens. And it all began after certain people entered your environment. That should alarm you. There are relationships that are not assignments from heaven. They are distractions from your destiny. And one terrifying sign is this: a spiritually dangerous person often tries to isolate you from godly voices. They do not want you strengthened. They do not want you discerning truth. So they subtly poison your perception of people who truly care about your soul. They create distrust, suspicion, division. And once isolation begins, spiritual attacks become easier. This is why discernment matters, not paranoia. Discernment. You are not called to hate people, but you are called to recognize darkness when it is operating through someone. Too many people ignore warning signs because they fear appearing judgmental. Meanwhile, their spiritual life is collapsing. You cannot afford spiritual blindness in this season. There are people who appear normal outwardly while secretly pursuing spiritual darkness behind closed doors. Some are obsessed with rituals, hidden practices, spiritual domination, curses, or manipulative energy. Others may not openly practice witchcraft, yet they willingly cooperate with darkness through hatred, envy, manipulation, and control. And here is what many fail to understand. Witchcraft is not always candles and rituals. Sometimes witchcraft operates through domination and manipulation. Whenever someone constantly tries to control your emotions, your decisions, your relationships, your peace, and your identity through fear or intimidation, you should pay attention. That spirit seeks control, not freedom. Healthy relationships produce peace. Dark influence produces bondage. You begin feeling trapped around them, afraid to disagree, to speak, afraid to walk away. And fear is one of darkness's favorite weapons, because fear weakens discernment. Fear silences truth. Fear keeps people spiritually imprisoned. But this is where everything changes. The moment you begin recognizing spiritual patterns, darkness loses secrecy, and secrecy is where it thrives. You must stop dismissing what your spirit has been warning you about. Some of you have felt constant unease around certain individuals for years. You kept making excuses, kept ignoring discernment. You kept silencing inner warnings. But now your eyes are opening. Not every connection was sent to bless you. Some connections were designed to distract, weaken, manipulate, and spiritually suffocate you. This is why prayer matters, because discernment is sharpened in the presence of God. The more spiritually awake you become, the harder it becomes for darkness to hide. And that terrifies the enemy, because exposed darkness becomes weakened darkness. The moment you stop ignoring spiritual red flags, you begin reclaiming your peace. Your clarity returns. Your spiritual authority rises. And the chains that once confused your mind begin breaking. You were never called to live spiritually blind. You are called to walk in discernment, authority, and truth. And this is only the beginning. One of the most dangerous signs is not loud evil. It is subtle control. Because the most destructive spiritual attacks often come wrapped in emotional attachment. The person may claim to love you, support you, protect you, but slowly your freedom disappears, your confidence weakens, your voice becomes smaller, and your peace begins dying in silence. That is not a healthy influence. That is bondage. A spiritually dangerous person does not always attack directly. Sometimes they manipulate, quietly, patiently, strategically. At first they study you, your wounds, your loneliness, your fears, your insecurities. Then they build emotional dependency. They make you feel like you need them for stability, need them for approval, need them for identity. And once emotional dependence is established, control begins. Suddenly you feel guilty for setting boundaries, guilty for protecting your peace, guilty for saying no. Every disagreement becomes emotional warfare. Every attempt at independence becomes betrayal. That is not love. Love does not imprison. Love does not manipulate through fear. Love does not suffocate your spirit. But people operating under dark, spiritual influence often crave domination. They need control because control gives darkness access. This is why manipulation is one of the clearest warning signs. Watch how they react when they cannot control you. That reveals everything. Do they become aggressive, cold, threatening, emotionally explosive? Do they punish you with silence? Do they twist your words until you question your own memory? Do they constantly make themselves the victim while draining your strength? Be careful. Confusion is a weapon. Some people intentionally distort reality to weaken your discernment. You begin doubting yourself, doubting your instincts, doubting what you clearly witnessed. And over time, you become spiritually exhausted. That exhaustion is not random. Dark influence seeks to wear people down mentally before attacking spiritually. A controlled mind becomes easier to influence. This is why certain people constantly keep others emotionally unstable. One day they praise you, the next day they humiliate you. One moment they pull you close, the next moment they reject you. This cycle creates emotional confusion, and confusion opens spiritual doors. You begin chasing approval instead of protecting your spirit. You begin tolerating abuse because you fear abandonment. You begin silencing truth because conflict terrifies you. And little by little, your spiritual authority disappears. There are people who know exactly how to weaponize emotions. They use guilt to control, fear to dominate, shame to silence, manipulation to weaken resistance. And many victims never recognize it because the attack appears emotional instead of spiritual. But emotional bondage is deeply spiritual, especially when it destroys identity, peace, clarity, and purpose. Have you noticed how some people constantly drain life from everyone around them? You encourage them endlessly, but they remain committed to negativity. You pray for them, but they resist truth. You try helping them, but chaos follows every conversation. After spending time with them, you feel empty, heavy, oppressed. That is not a small warning sign. Some individuals carry such intense bitterness, jealousy, rage, or spiritual darkness that their presence affects atmospheres. They spread heaviness, hopelessness, fear. And if you are spiritually undiscerning, you may unknowingly allow their darkness to influence your own emotions. This is why guarding your spirit matters. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to your life. Some people enter relationships searching for control, not connection. And here is another terrifying sign. Spiritually manipulative people often isolate their targets. They slowly disconnect you from healthy voices. They criticize your trusted friends, attack your mentors, create tension in your family. Why? Because isolation increases vulnerability. Darkness works best when people are spiritually alone. Once isolated, the manipulation deepens. Now you depend entirely on their version of truth. Their emotions define your atmosphere. Their approval defines your confidence. Their moods control your peace. That is spiritual imprisonment. And many people stay trapped for years because emotional chains can feel invisible. You may even defend the person hurting you, protect them, excuse them, cover for them. Meanwhile, your spiritual life is collapsing behind closed doors. Your prayer life weakens, your joy disappears, your mind becomes restless, your discernment fades, and suddenly you no longer recognize yourself. This is how spiritual oppression spreads, quietly, gradually, through constant emotional erosion. Some people are deeply uncomfortable when they lose control over others. The moment you begin setting boundaries, they panic. The moment you begin healing, they attack. The moment you rediscover your confidence, they intensify manipulation. Why? Because your freedom threatens their influence. A person operating through dark control does not celebrate your growth. They fear it. They fear your awakening. They fear your spiritual clarity. Because awakened people are harder to manipulate. And this is why many spiritually oppressed individuals suddenly experience conflict when they begin praying seriously. Darkness resists deliverance. The moment you begin reclaiming your authority, resistance increases. You may notice intensified emotional attacks, sudden accusations, unexpected hostility, strange tension. Do not ignore it. Battles are spiritual before they become visible physically. But here is what you must understand clearly. You were never created to live under emotional slavery. You were not created to constantly walk on eggshells. You are not created to lose your identity trying to satisfy controlling people. You are created for freedom, for clarity, for spiritual authority. And sometimes deliverance begins the moment you stop tolerating manipulation. There are people who secretly feed on weakness, enjoy controlling reactions, controlling emotions, controlling decisions. But the moment you become spiritually aware, their influence begins breaking, because manipulation loses power when exposed. This is why discernment is dangerous to darkness. The enemy thrives where people remain emotionally blind. But once your eyes open, chains begin falling. You begin recognizing patterns you once ignored. You stop confusing control with love, fear with loyalty, bondage with connection, and suddenly you understand why your spirit kept warning you. Some people were never assigned to protect your destiny, they were assigned to drain it. This does not mean every difficult person is a witch, but it does mean some individuals willingly cooperate with darkness through manipulation, domination, envy, emotional bondage, and spiritual corruption. And if you ignore those patterns long enough, the damage becomes severe. Your peace matters, your spirit matters, your discernment matters. Guilt to silence spiritual wisdom. Because one of the enemy's greatest strategies is convincing people to remain connected to what is destroying them. But tonight, awareness is rising. Your spiritual eyes are opening. And what once controlled you will no longer remain hidden. Not every smile is genuine. Not every compliment carries purity. Some people celebrate you publicly while secretly resenting you privately. And this is one of the most dangerous signs of all, hidden envy, because envy is not harmless emotion. Unchecked envy becomes spiritual poison. There are people who become deeply disturbed when they see favor on your life. They cannot understand why doors open for you, why people trust you, why peace surrounds you, why your life keeps moving forward after every battle. And instead of becoming inspired, they become bitter, quietly bitter. At first, the signs are subtle. They downplay your achievements, minimize your growth, ignore your breakthroughs. Every time something good happens to you, their energy changes. You can feel it. The atmosphere shifts immediately. Their words sound supportive, but something underneath feels wrong. That discomfort is not always paranoia. Sometimes your spirit detects hidden hostility before your mind understands it. You must remember this. Darkness does not only attack through hatred, sometimes it attacks through jealousy. Jealousy studies you, watches you, compares itself to you constantly. And when jealousy remains unchecked long enough, it can become destructive. There are people who secretly celebrate your failures, people who smile at your face but feel satisfaction when you struggle. Why? Because your progress exposes their inner emptiness, your discipline convicts their laziness, your spiritual hunger exposes their compromise, and instead of changing themselves, they attempt to pull you downwards. This is why spiritually dangerous people often discourage growth. The moment you become serious about prayer, they mock you. The moment you begin healing emotionally, they create drama. The moment you pursue purpose, they suddenly become critical. Nothing you do is ever enough. Nothing you achieve is ever acknowledged fully. Because envy cannot genuinely celebrate what it secretly resents. And one terrifying reality is this: envious people often gather information before launching attacks. They ask questions constantly, study your plans, observe your relationships, watch your weaknesses carefully, not to protect you, to understand you. Some people listen only to collect ammunition for future manipulation. That is why discernment matters even in conversation. Not everyone asking personal questions deserves personal access. There are individuals who become obsessed with monitoring your life. They track your progress, watch your relationships, study your routines, notice every blessing. And when they cannot reach your level spiritually, emotionally, or personally, resentment begins growing in darkness. This is why some people suddenly change after witnessing your breakthrough. You thought they would celebrate. Instead, they became distant, cold, hostile, passive aggressive, and you could not understand why. But spiritual envy often reveals itself after favor becomes visible, especially when someone secretly wanted your position, influence, peace, relationships, or calling. The frightening part is that envious people rarely announce their intentions openly. They disguise resentment behind fake support. They speak sweetly while internally competing with you. And competition rooted in envy can become spiritually dangerous. Because envy seeks what you have. It covets your joy, your peace, your influence, your identity, your favor. And when envy cannot possess those things, it often seeks to destroy them. Have you ever noticed how certain people constantly speak negatively over your future? You share a dream, they respond with doubt. You share hope, they release fear. You share progress, they predict failure. That negativity is not accidental. Words carry spiritual weight. Some individuals constantly release discouragement because they resent seeing confidence grow inside you. They want you uncertain, fearful, weak. Because confident people are harder to control. Spiritually awake people are harder to manipulate. And darkness fears people who know their authority. There are even moments when envious individuals intentionally provoke emotional reactions. They want you angry, distracted, emotionally unstable. Because if they can pull you into chaos, they can weaken your focus. This is why some people constantly create unnecessary tension around you. Constant criticism, constant conflict, constant emotional games. Their goal is exhaustion. And spiritual exhaustion makes discernment weaker. You must guard your spirit carefully around people who secretly resent your growth. Not every battle requires confrontation. Sometimes wisdom means distance. Jesus himself avoided certain people because he understood their intentions. Discernment is not hatred, it is protection. There are people who become uncomfortable whenever light increases in your life. The stronger your prayer life becomes, the stranger their behavior becomes. The more disciplined you become, the more resistance appears. The more peaceful you become, the more they attempt provoking chaos. That reaction reveals something deeper happening spiritually. Darkness becomes agitated around genuine spiritual growth. And one of the clearest signs of hidden envy is this: they constantly compete with you instead of supporting you. Everything becomes comparison. If you succeed, they must outdo it. If you share joy, they redirect attention to themselves. If you receive encouragement, they suddenly need recognition too. This endless competition reveals insecurity mixed with resentment. Healthy people celebrate others. Spiritually corrupted envy struggles to do that. And over time, hidden envy can transform into active sabotage. Some people deliberately delay opportunities, spread subtle lies, damage reputations quietly, create misunderstandings intentionally, all while pretending innocence publicly. That is why spiritual discernment is necessary. Not everyone clapping for you wants you to win. Some are studying how to access your weaknesses, and many people ignore warning signs because they fear appearing suspicious. Meanwhile, spiritual attacks increase around them continuously, cannot afford to remain naive, especially in seasons where your destiny, peace, and purpose are under pressure. There are individuals who feel tormented by your existence because your life reminds them of what they lack internally. Your peace irritates them. Your confidence unsettles them. Your growth exposes their stagnation. And rather than heal, they attack, sometimes subtly, sometimes aggressively. But the root is often hidden bitterness and envy. This is why you must stop sharing every detail of your life with everyone. Not every listener is loyal. Not every supporter is safe. Some people gain access only to monitor, compare, manipulate, or compete spiritually. And one dangerous mistake many people make is ignoring repeated spiritual warnings. You sense dishonesty, you sensed hidden resentment, you sense manipulation. But you kept dismissing it because the person appeared friendly outwardly. Meanwhile, your spirit kept sounding alarms internally. Never ignore consistent spiritual unease, especially when patterns keep repeating. God often warns before destruction arrives. And discernment becomes sharper when you stop idolizing people emotionally. Some individuals are deeply broken spiritually, and unless they confront darkness within themselves, they will continue spreading confusion, envy, manipulation, and destruction wherever they go. But here is the good news. Darkness cannot permanently destroy what God is protecting. No hidden envy can cancel your calling. No manipulation can erase your destiny. No spiritual attack can overpower divine authority when you remain spiritually awake. The key is awareness, prayer, wisdom. Once you recognize hidden patterns, you stop giving darkness unrestricted access to your life. And that changes everything. There are people who leave behind more than memories. They leave patterns. And patterns reveal what words try to hide. One of the strongest warning signs is when darkness seems to follow a person everywhere they go. Nothing around them remains stable for long. Friendships collapse, relationships shatter, conflict constantly erupts, and somehow chaos always surrounds them. At first, you may think it is coincidence, bad luck, misunderstanding, personality differences. But after watching the same destruction repeat again and again, you begin realizing something deeper may be operating underneath. Because spiritually corrupted influence leaves fingerprints. Have you noticed how certain individuals always seem connected to confusion? Every workplace becomes toxic. Every friendship ends in betrayal. Every relationship becomes manipulation. Every environment eventually turns hostile. And yet they never accept responsibility. Everyone else is always the problem. That pattern matters. Darkness often hides behind perpetual victimhood. A spiritually dangerous person rarely admits wrongdoing honestly. Instead, they rewrite history constantly. They twist narratives, manipulate emotions, and over time, people around them become mentally exhausted trying to separate truth from deception. That confusion is not small. Confusion weakens discernment. And weakened discernment opens spiritual doors. Some people also carry strange fascination with spiritual power itself. Not holiness, power, control, mystery, hidden knowledge. They become obsessed with domination, secret influence, manipulation, rituals, psychic practices, curses, or forbidden spiritual curiosity. Even when they claim innocence, their appetite for darkness becomes obvious over time. You hear them constantly speaking about revenge, energy manipulation, manifesting control over others, spiritual intimidation, fear tactics. That obsession is dangerous because darkness often enters through curiosity before it establishes bondage. Many people begin by experimenting, then eventually become spiritually trapped. And once darkness gains influence, the person themselves may begin changing dramatically. Their eyes feel different. Their energy feels oppressive. Their presence creates unease you cannot explain logically. You feel drained after interactions, restless afterward, heavy in prayer, unable to focus spiritually. Do not ignore those reactions automatically. Your spirit can often detect danger before your mind understands it fully. This does not mean every uncomfortable feeling is proof someone is a witch. Discernment requires wisdom, but repeated spiritual disturbance surrounding one individual should never be ignored carelessly, especially when their presence consistently produces fear, confusion, temptation, oppression, or emotional instability. There are also people who become strangely agitated when confronted with spiritual truth. Watch carefully. The moment deep prayer begins, tension rises. The moment scripture exposes darkness, irritation appears. The moment genuine worship fills the atmosphere, discomfort becomes visible. Why? Because darkness reacts under spiritual pressure. Some individuals can comfortably discuss anything except truth that convicts the soul. The moment holiness enters the conversation, hostility surfaces, mockery begins, disrespect increases, deflection appears immediately. And this is where many believers become deceived, because outward appearance can hide inward corruption. A person may appear intelligent, kind, successful, even religious outwardly, yet secretly cooperate with darkness internally. Warned repeatedly about deception, not obvious evil. Deception, things that appear harmless at first. This is why spiritual maturity matters more than emotional attachment. You cannot afford to judge only by charisma. Some of the most spiritually dangerous individuals are highly persuasive. They know how to appear trustworthy, how to gain sympathy, how to manipulate perception, how to control narratives. And because people focus only on appearances, the hidden darkness continues operating, unnoticed. Another terrifying sign is persistent intimidation. Spiritually corrupted people often use fear as a weapon, not always physical fear, emotional fear, psychological fear, spiritual fear. They want others intimidated by them, controlled by them, silenced around them. You may notice constant threats, intimidation tactics, emotional pressure, or attempts to dominate atmospheres. Fear empowers manipulation, but the moment fear breaks, control weakens. That is why spiritually awakened people become difficult targets, because awareness destroys intimidation. There are also moments when spiritually dangerous people seem strangely attracted to vulnerable individuals. Broken people, emotionally wounded people, spiritually confused people. Why? Because vulnerable minds are easier to influence. Some individuals intentionally seek relationships where they can dominate emotionally, spiritually, or psychologically. They appear supportive initially, helpful, protective, but eventually, the control becomes visible. The victim slowly loses confidence, identity weakens, isolation increases, fear grows. And the spiritually dangerous individual gains deeper emotional influence over their life. That is not healthy connection. That is spiritual predation. You must understand something clearly tonight. Darkness survives through secrecy. The longer deception remains hidden, the stronger its influence becomes. But exposure weakens darkness immediately. The moment truth enters the situation, manipulation begins losing power. This is why spiritually manipulative people often hate accountability. They avoid exposure, avoid honest confrontation, avoid truth-centered environments, because truth threatens hidden agendas. And here is one of the strongest warnings of all. A spiritually dangerous person often leaves people spiritually weaker after prolonged exposure. Prayer becomes difficult, motivation disappears, peace decreases, confusion increases, faith weakens, intensifies. You begin feeling disconnected spiritually without understanding why. That pattern should never be ignored casually. Some relationships are spiritual traps disguised as emotional connections. And if you stay blind long enough, the damage can become devastating. This is why discernment must become part of your daily life. Not fear, not paranoia, discernment. You are not called to accuse everyone around you, but you are called to remain spiritually awake. Too many people ignore warnings until destruction becomes unavoidable. They silence discernment because they fear conflict. Meanwhile, darkness continues gaining access quietly. But tonight your eyes are opening. You are beginning to understand why certain environments felt heavy, why certain conversations drained you, why certain people always produced confusion, exhaustion, fear, or spiritual instability. Patterns matter, spiritual fruit matters, atmospheres matter. And once discernment becomes active, darkness becomes easier to recognize. The enemy thrives where people remain spiritually asleep. But awakened believers become dangerous to darkness because awareness leads to authority, and authority breaks chains. You do not have to live intimidated by manipulation, fear, envy, oppression, or spiritual confusion. You were created to walk in clarity, in wisdom, in spiritual authority, and no hidden darkness can permanently overpower a life protected by God and guided by discernment. Now you understand why certain battles felt deeper than emotions, deeper than coincidence, deeper than human conflict. Your eyes are opening and darkness loses power the moment it is exposed. You are not weak, you are not blind, and you are not defenseless. Every chain of confusion, manipulation, fear, and spiritual oppression can be broken when you walk in discernment and authority. What once intimidated you will no longer control you. What once drained your peace will no longer access your spirit freely. Stand alert, stand fearless, and never forget this darkness trembles when awakened people finally see clearly.